All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started here. I want to first thank everyone for coming. We really appreciate that. Also would love to thank our sponsors here, Lake Lawn Resort, for this beautiful space here. Nice setup. The fire's great this morning. Ideal Impressions for the video taping that he's doing. We'll be having this link available at some point after the event in case you'd like to review it or share it with others. And then I'd really like to thank our speakers for coming as well, taking time out of their day to share some good information with us. My remarks are just going to be real brief, and then we'll get to the program here. But first of all, just like I said, most of us in the room live and work in a pretty wonderful place, and in general, Wisconsin has a lot of great attributes. I just spent a long weekend with a good friend of mine, and he lives in Illinois and works in Illinois, but has a seasonal home in Fontana. And we got talking about the quality of life in Wisconsin, and he told me that Wisconsin is one of the best states he's ever spent time in. And so I was asking him a little bit about it. He says, well, the environment's beautiful, people are friendly, they're hardworking, and he just felt like there was a good value for what he pays, particularly in taxes. And so I think that value that he references comes from our priorities and values as a county and a state, and I think that's really what we're here to discuss today. So Dave Brittle, our county administrator, will be our first speaker, and he'll bring us up to speed with the state of the county. Can't think of a person who's more dedicated to community service. We're really very lucky to have such a talented person in his role. For our second speaker, we have a substitution. You'll see on the program there. Matt Winden, Russ Cashin will be providing us a state perspective in place of Matt Winden. Russ is the director of FERC, which is Fiscal and Economic Research Center. He's also a professor of economics at UW-Whitewater. I have no doubt that you'll find Russ's insights interesting and thought-provoking. And then John Scavlin from Baker Tilly will conclude our event with a fascinating discussion about our tax landscape, particularly as it compares to Illinois. In terms of the format of the discussion, we've reserved time at the end for questions, and I would ask if you just save your questions until then. So let's get started. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Good morning, and thanks for having me here today. There's no clock in the room, so I've got my phone, and I'm kind of technologically challenged here, so the only clock I have is a world clock, so about 6:30 p.m. Kabul time, I will knock this off. I've delivered the State of the County presentation for quite a few years at Wceda. It has an interesting history. It goes back to the old Eggs and Issues time. There's a lot of old Wceda folks here with Fred Burkhardt. Really when no one else would speak at Wceda events, so that's got this great history here. And Derek turned the temperature down to keep everybody awake, so let's get started. I got to play a little straighter. We're getting videotaped here, so we'll edit all this out later. It'll edit down to about 5 minutes probably, Derek, so you can post it on YouTube or something. So again, thanks for having me here today, and I'll try to give a little bit of an overview about the county, and maybe to put things into context a little bit. And this is an economic development organization, and what does this have to do maybe with economic development? And I think the county, at least in my estimation, I think the boards have been pretty consistent that way. We try to understand what our role is in the county, and we certainly, the board supports Wceda in the efforts and appreciates all the efforts of the folks who contribute to that. But I think what the county government can do is really provide a high level of service and quality of life in the county, which has the ability, I think, to attract and retain folks and businesses here. And secondly, do it at a reasonable cost, and to try to contain taxes and keep things predictable. And that at one level can be kind of boring because it's not flashy and there's maybe not a lot of new programs, but I think at another level very important going forward to create a stable situation and a good quality of life in the county. I point out a couple of my bosses who are here today. Nancy Russell, our board chair, who's been in charge almost the whole time that I've been here, and Shar Staples is one of our new board members, so thank you for coming today, and they can keep me honest if I stray too far here from my past. One of the first slides that I'd like to start with is just the tax levy. This is the bottom line for homeowners and business owners in the county in terms of what you have to pay. And this, I think, is a chart that I'm proud of. We've had 4 years of basically a tax levy freeze starting in 2012. There's been some two fractional increases there. 0.45% was our last one, the 2014 levy to support 2015. But I think it is in a good place. I guess in my estimation, it's important that budgeting be sustainable. And so rather than have a lot of spikes where, you know, one year we've frozen the levy and the next year it's a 10% increase or something, and we've had in our distant past a history of doing that. We try to get a system in place that will provide for relatively low tax increases, and I can't say that it's going to be that way forever, but it is, I think, a program that we can repeat for the near future at least. Equalized value has been a really interesting story in Walworth County. Equalized value is really the price that would be fetched if every taxable parcel of property were put up for sale at once, and Warren Buffett would come in and buy the whole county. And this has been interesting because really the precipitous drop, I think, in recent years, starting with the whole banking crisis. This chart is, I think, is explained better if you've got that budget in brief on page 7. It shows it in a table form. But we really, you know, from having years of double-digit property value increases, 12, 13, almost 14%, we got into negative territory there with -3 and a -1 and 6. And you can see it on this chart. And finally, the first time in 5 years, I think we ended up in positive territory, at least according to the Department of Revenue. So hopefully we'll see those prices and property values increase and slowly recover. Put up a slide here with the mill rate. This is the tax bill that the county prepares. Is a number of different components on it. Not everybody in the county pays all of them. For example, the library levy is something that would apply to township residents who don't have their own library, but that is levied and to support municipal libraries. And so you see the different levies that comprise the county tax bill right there. We're 51st among the 72 Wisconsin counties. That was a 2013 mill rate at least, so we're in the lower half at least of Wisconsin counties. This is the calculation of the tax, and this was for the 2015 budget, $150,000 home. Property tax bill consists of a number of different taxing jurisdictions, and I think this is important and not always understood. It was, I think, great that a lot of folks had relief from the technical college tax, and it's always difficult to explain, and people's eyes kind of glaze over if you get it, not necessarily in this room, but with some of the general public when you start to explain some of the nuances to it, and well, you know, they were financial geniuses or something to be able to cut their tax levy by half. The point is that the state picked up half of that, which I think was a good idea, but it provided some tax relief, and I think a lot of people noticed that and commented on it. We don't have such luck here at the county, so supporting our programs, you know, we haven't had any additional state funding, pardon me, and actually the tendency has been reductions in terms of state funding and our ability to raise revenue. This is just a comparison of the tax levy and broken down by the different components. And you can kind of, it gives a good explanation, I think, of really what's under the hood and what's going on. The library levy was down. It's a pretty small levy, but probably the biggest components on their debt service, which was down about 19%. The county has really made an effort to aggressively pay down its debt, and so that has provided a fair amount of leeway in the rest of the budget. Our special needs school is down as well, and I think that's been a real positive story in terms of that operation. We are in our last year of transitioning out of special needs education in school districts, and that was a controversial issue at the time in about 2005, where the county had actually staffed 30-some schools, I think, with county employees for special needs education. And one of the compromises that was really struck when we built a new special school was to get out of and transition out of those district operations and just run a real state-of-the-art special needs school. And so that controversial at the time, and the argument was, well, if you do that, you're not going to cut spending, you're not going to cut taxes, and that hasn't been the case. I think almost every year we've been able to reduce the levy for the Wceda. Operating is what the closest look at, because that's the one that's going to be with us for always, and that is 1.59%, is about 3 times higher than what the overall levy was. So what you see going on is really debt service is helping to offset our operating costs, and we have to really keep an eye on that, because once we get to the point of having this debt paid down, or perhaps even paid off, is that the operating levy then is going to be the one that you see, and right now that's being subsidized by debt service. This is another slide that I'm proud of, and I think is a credit to our board in terms of our debt service. And one of the things that we had done in really the decade of 2000 to about 2008, those years, is we replaced virtually our entire physical plant. We remodeled our Health and Human Services building. We built a new judicial center. We tore down our old school and nursing home and built new ones. We renovated our government center. And that was, I think, all needed, and it was all situations of deferred maintenance over the years, and was really hurting our operations budget due to utilities and maintenance and things like that. So that was all good, but we took on a lot of debt during that time in order to do all that construction. The positive thing is it was in a relatively low interest rate environment, but we were well over $55 million in debt at the point when we had finished all those building projects, and that was a very sore point with a fair number of taxpayers, and I heard from a lot of them during that time. And it is a conservative county, I think, with conservative values, and debt is something that a lot of people want to avoid personally, and I agree with them. And so after we had completed all those projects, we really got in a program of trying to aggressively pay down that debt. And you can see from this chart our annual debt service, and that's a significant portion of dollars that are going to pay off those bonds, and interest is money that is either has to be raised from taxpayers or is not available to provide programming. So you can see the portion in black is when we had an opportunity to call bonds early, and in almost every year from 2009 to 2014 we did that. We're out of bonds to call right now until 2017, and then at that point we have options in 2017 and 2018, and I guess I can't say what we're going to do, although we're philosophically I think we're not issuing new debt, and I think to get out of to pay off our remaining debt is a prudent thing going forward. So there's just a picture of our Lakeland School, and one of the buildings that caused some of that debt, but I think a very unique place, and again, one of the one of the programs that really adds to the quality of life in Lower County. Very unique. There's nothing, no other one like it really in the state. Getting back to the debt picture here, and that, 2008 was really the high water mark for that at over about $55 million. We've now paid down to about 20 million, and we have not borrowed since 2011, and I don't think we're not projecting the need to, at least through 2019. Another program that the county board has really taken seriously is, and again, to try to avoid debt, is to get cash on hand to pay for some of our projects from current levy dollars. And our highway program is one of those. And this goes back probably to about 2000 when the board and the county had traditionally taxed as we went along to pay for our roads. And I think that was a real prudent and conservative thing to do, because the program is very predictable from year to year. We do the same amount of mileage typically in terms of reconstruction of roads. So what the deal was back then is there was a loophole really in the tax cap law that said if you float bonds to do your road program, that doesn't count against your tax. And so in order to free up dollars in the operating side of the budget, the move was made to take that off of the tax levy, the road program, and to borrow for it. And it's kind of like it's an addiction, once you start borrowing, it's very difficult to wean yourself off of that. And it took the county probably about 14 years or 13 years in order to transfer that from a borrowed program into current dollars. And so what we've done is really tried to maintain a stable balance of about $4 or $4.5 million for the road program. This year, a big one that we're going to be doing, and if you have any business out at the county campus or the hospital, will be Highway NN, and that's being torn up right now as we speak. But that, I think, will be really dramatic when it's done. It will be finished off to urban standards and lighting, and an additional lane is on there, as well as a connection to our White River State Trail. So it'll be very nice when it's finished. The bad news is it'll be about 2 years because the DOT is doing the Highway 12 bridges at the same time, so that's a 2-year project. So leave extra time if you're on jury duty, I guess, is the thing there. A couple of other expansions that we're going to be involved in, or renovations in the near future, is Public Works. It's kind of difficult to see, but that's the oldest building. That's the only one really that we haven't done anything with in the past 15 years, and it's showing its age. Like anything else, the trucks get bigger, and the needs for space increase as our lane miles do to plow and to maintain. So that renovation will be taking place in 2016. We're in the planning right now, and bids should go out at the fall of this year. Health and Human Services is also another project that we have lined up, and that building had been renovated in 2002, and really there's been since that time just a dramatic change in programming, and it used to be more of a referral type of agency where individuals would come in, and then a lot of the clinical work was outsourced, so it was more of an office building. About the mid-2000s or so, 2006 maybe, we took a different approach, and that was to provide clinical services at the facility. And the reason for doing that is if we provide the clinical services, then we can draw down federal dollars, and that was, I think, a real prudent move at the time, because it's really helped keep that HHS levy very stable, and that's one that can really go up dramatically and have bad effects on the budget. But the problem is, you finish off a building for offices, and then you turn it into a clinic, and it actually started out as a hospital, so who knows, maybe it's, but we'll work on that. Both of those projects, the Public Works expansion and HHS, will be done without the need to borrow. HHS is a 2019 project. I've talked about this in the past. but it's, I think, another positive story from the county's perspective. Other post-employment benefits, and this is really the liability that the county had for promising, either through labor contracts or ordinances, health insurance for retirees. And it worked differently for different groups, the benefit. For example, teachers, when they retired, were promised 5 years of single coverage, free. Deputies would get half of their coverage paid. General employees could convert sick leave, which could be accrued in unlimited amounts, to health insurance credits that would be used to purchase health insurance. So when, and this isn't a unique idea to Walworth County, although it's somewhat unique in terms of the fact that the county board addressed it. About 2004, we sat down and said, well, gee, you make all these promises, and no one had really had ever calculated what the financial impact of those were over time. And what we had found out in valuing it in 2005 was that was almost $24 million that the county would need to come up with between, over the period of 30 years in order to provide that benefit. And we had $0 on hand. And to make it even worse, I think, we had a pay-as-you-go system, so when people retired, we'd pay for their health insurance. And when you looked at that over time, it was absolutely frightening in terms of the amount of the operating budget that was going to be taken up by paying for retirees. And so in 2005, and Nancy was there at the time, the board had done a couple of different things. One was to end the benefit, and we still did that in the context of the union. We negotiated that, so the benefit was ended for new hires. But secondly, we created a trust fund at the time to start to accumulate money so we could pay off that obligation. And it's I like doing things methodically and consistently, and you look at this, it's the old journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. It seemed like such a steep mountain that we were never going to get there. The black indicates the portion of that liability that we funded. So today it's fully funded, and the other part that's kind of interesting is to see this. I didn't know how this was actually going to turn out, but it kept increasing the liability, and then plateaued and decreased. And I think the other component that you see here is changes that we made to our health insurance plan. So if you're providing a less generous benefit, then the cost goes down. So we're back to where we started in 2005 at about a little over 23 million, but the difference is it's now funded. This is a chart here to indicate our biggest cost, of course, is personnel at over half of our budget, and that can be a challenge to try to maintain tax control when half of the budget is going to personnel costs. This is the comparison of wages versus benefits in terms of our overall cost, and that's been pretty stable, I think, over time. We've made changes to our health insurance plan. I think it's still a very good benefit, but we have a high deductible plan now for employees with a health savings account. And it's kind of interesting to see how that drives consumer behavior, including my own, when you are inclined maybe to go to the doctor, but you don't necessarily have to rush out, or you might be a little bit more prudent in how you spend that. Showing just our revenues right here, we about 44% is from local property tax dollars, but we also, as an agent of the state, receive a considerable amount of funding from the state of Wisconsin and federal government, which that's our bigger unknown, I think, is what happens with those budgets, and it can have a real significant impact in terms of the programming that we do. One of the couple of issues, I guess, going forward that I just wanted to talk about briefly, some things going on in the county. Transportation is one of the issues that we're really studying right now, and in a geographically large county that's fairly rural yet, we're trying to figure out how to get folks from point A to point B, and one of the demographic issues that's happening here is we're all getting older. Everybody's getting older except me, I guess, but the whole population is aging, and so it's like, how, you want them to be in their homes, and that's a great place, but if you're kind of a prisoner in your own house, what do that's not much of a life either. So we're trying to figure out how to ramp up our transportation program for seniors, and so we have a transportation coordinating committee, and I think I saw Andy Kerwin back there. He's our vice chair on that, and a really good group of folks trying to figure out how we can stretch our transportation dollars a little bit further. But this just shows the how the 75 and older group, for example, from 5,000 to 6,200 people. So we got to figure this out. Public Works is an issue. I think that our Public Works Director, Central Services Director Kevin Brunner is here today, so I didn't even put these, I didn't even know you were coming, but I put these slides in, so I was just lucky. But we're trying to, as there's new highway projects all the time, that adds to our maintenance requirements under contract with the state of Wisconsin. We maintain the state and the freeway system, and right now we actually had hired, one or two patrol positions, Kevin, to try to, our average truck covers about 53 miles on a beat. That's once around, and that's not exactly where we want it to be, but I think they do an outstanding job in terms of keeping the roads safe, and so we appreciate that. A couple of just changes in the county organization and succession planning, and it's kind of interesting because it's sort of, there's classes almost in the county, and people are kind of aging out, and I'm in one of those. But Health and Human Services, Linda Seemeyer had retired, and she done some really good work for us, so Liz Aldred has taken over there. We have a new sheriff, Kurt Picknell, has taken the helm from Dave Graves, and Kurt had been the undersheriff for many years, so I think we're in real good hands there. And then I have my friend John Griebel here, who had passed away, and John had been the coroner for 52 years. I always pointed out to him before I was born, he was the coroner, and that's an amazing tenure. But that's been kind of an interesting program where we have, working cooperatively with Waukesha County, actually the pathologist there, Dr. Linda Podritsky, is our medical examiner, and we switched from the elected coroner system to a medical examiner system, and then we just have a lady that we hired recently who will be our person on the ground here, our lead investigator. So I think John had done a great job. Just a couple other loose ends here, I guess. What have we done in terms of controlling taxes? I think over time, since half of our levy is driven by payroll, we've tried to keep a handle on the number of full-time equivalent employees that we have. About mid-2000s, I think we were probably maybe 1,100 or so employees in the county. We had gotten that down to a low of 796. Now we've seen the trend is really kind of reversing, and there was a lot of pent-up demand. When we were trying to pay off all these things, fund OPEB, pay off our debt, one of the ways we did that was by reducing personnel, and you can only really do that for so long. And so now we're starting to see that on the uptick, although I think, if I were to come back next year, I'm not sure that we might be down a little bit, just because I don't think we're going to have the ability to add 8 or 9 positions a year. This changes this year in terms of FTE, which is not all that critical. In terms of how your tax dollar is spent, it's divided pretty equally between two of our larger departments, the sheriff's and Health and Human Services. But they're funded very differently. The sheriff is pretty much purely on the tax levy, so even though they're HHS and the sheriff spend about the same amount of money, 39% of the tax levy goes to the sheriff versus 18% at HHS. That just kind of shows the impact of state funding on that. Just a chart in here about we still run a nursing home. I think that's, two of the programs that we are able to run that I think are quality of life things are the healthcare center. It's a skilled nursing facility, and our Wceda, our Children's Disability Education Board. But this really shows a fairly level tax levy attributable to that healthcare center operation, and I think that's a real credit to the folks out there. We're projecting about a $5 million annual cost when we had our old buildings, and we really looked at it and said, well, if we construct a new, more efficient facility, we downsized it, we should be able to be at about the $3.5 million mark, which is what we thought in 2004. I never would have dreamed it would have stayed level like that, so it's a good operation out there. Finally, our chair is a passionate parks person. I have to just slide in here for Nancy, and then there she is right at the White River County Park. We had acquired through the use of stewardship funds a really nice parcel of land in the town of Lyons on the White River, and they had a grand opening for that in July, along with our dog park that we opened up. So we're trying to, on the margins, I think, do some things to provide some recreational opportunities for folks. And I think that was the last of my slides here. I wanted to, I've got my leadership Walworth tag on here, and I just wanted to make a little bit of a plug for that. Skip Mossimer, who's over at that table, is leading an initiative that I really feel strongly about. And what it is, it's about a 9-month program, and some of you are involved or have funded seats in that. The idea is to try to develop leadership countywide, and without necessarily any specific agenda other than to create leaders. And so he has a cohort of about 10 students, I think, Skip, and they're drawn from different areas of the county, from private sector, from education, and really neat group. They meet monthly, all day on Fridays, and the only plug that I'll make is that the second cohort for that, this is the inaugural class, the second one will start in September. And so I'd really encourage you, if you have an individual in your organization who would benefit from that, or who could benefit the county, and not just county government, but county-wide, by attending that program. It is a really unique program, and thanks to Skip for doing that. So with that, Derek, I don't know if you want to take questions or keep going on with the speeches here and do them after. It's up to you.
Yeah, maybe after table.
That'll be fine. So thank you very much for your time.
All right, I'd like to introduce Russ, and who's going to give us, I think, Russ Cashin from UW, give us just a state perspective on what's happening here. So please welcome Russ.
I'll make it fast. I'm going to put my glasses on, although they don't really work. Matt was probably sitting up here. Matt's my colleague. Matt's a young professor out of Ohio State University. Just came to Whitewater 3 years ago. And when I left, I'm sure Matt was sweating. He just abandoned me. Has anyone actually heard me speak before? I'm just wondering. Oh God. Well, I don't care about. I don't care about but. So you're going to hear it again. Basically, talk a little bit about Wisconsin. Talk a little bit about what's going on here. I'm very pro the U.S. economy. One of the things, I have really bad sleep apnea. And so I don't sleep much, but I don't really stay awake much. I just kind of keep going back and forth. And so every morning, I get up around 4 in the morning and I watch European business news. And it's interesting because, first of all the European business news reporters look like Niles Crane from Frasier. They're these like skinny guys with bald heads, and they're not handsome like American newscasters. And they basically sit there and say, we'll have economic growth of 2%, 2.5%, and we'll wring our hands. And we'll go, we're going to hell in a handbasket. You're taping us, right? Yeah. And they're, 2.5%, that's like a decade in Spain. And, they're like, what do the Americans want? They're growing at 2.5%. It's kind of, it's kind of like the Packers only winning by 40 points. You're like, well, when do you take Rodgers out? the United States really wants to run the score up. And so do I, by the way. So I just find it interesting because we get very depressed when we only add 180,000 jobs. We get depressed when the profit numbers come out and they're 2 cents short. I work for companies where if we made 2 cents, we'd be lucky. And so, that's kind of my observation on the American economy is the wonderful thing about it is we're incredibly competitive. And we don't like to lose, and we certainly don't like to not win by a lot. My talk is as goes Wisconsin, so goes Wisconsin. Because Wisconsin is a weird state. And I was born and raised here, and so is Matt actually. It's kind of a weird thing in Whitewater. We have a lot of economists who were born in Wisconsin. And so we identify with our students very strongly. I stole most of this from those guys, so I made the font small. The challenge of being Wisconsin is we're the same size as Minnesota. But the problem with Wisconsin is about every 72 miles we have another stupid city of about 45 to 80,000 people. And we have to service those cities. If you look at Wisconsin, and I could count them, but there's about 13 metropolitan areas that the government would say, Madison's a metropolitan area, Janesville, Racine, Milwaukee, Fond du Lac. We have to service these areas, and it's incredibly inefficient. Minnesota basically has, 5? Everyone lives in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is a draw for young people because it's about twice the size of the market as Milwaukee. I'm from Milwaukee. I grew up in the south side of Milwaukee. Wonderful place. The young nightlife section is 3 blocks long. And, Minneapolis is vibrant and dynamic because they packed all 5 million of their people into one city. Even Illinois, which is a big state, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 metropolitan areas. Wisconsin has 13. They packed them all into Chicago. And so Wisconsin has a challenge in that it has Sheboygan and Manitowoc and Green Bay and Wausau, and then you keep going around the state and you keep running into these cities. By the way, this comes out of our dairy farming heritage. That you have to get dairy to market every day. Every single day. You have to have paved roads to do it. In Illinois, they don't have dairy. They have soybeans. Soybeans don't have to get to market every day. You can actually have dirt roads because if it rains, you just wait until the road's dry and you take them to market then. Wisconsin was designed for dairy, and we have cities all over the state that are serving them. Education in Wisconsin, we have, there's this notion in Wisconsin that we have a brain drain. We don't have a brain drain. In fact, we have the opposite. By the way, process versus outcome, success lies in the process. I will say this, I've been coaching youth sports for about 15 years, and I learned more coaching youth sports than I learned in graduate school. And one of the things I've learned is that the winners like the process, and from the process comes the outcome. And I've had a lot of great athletes play for me who don't like to come to practice, and they're not great. You need to love the process. You need to love to come to class. You need to love to go to practice. And that's why I put that up there. It always reminds me of that. Wisconsin has a highly educated population in the south and in the cities in this area. Up north, it's less so. We have a problem with the brain drain up there and the fact that it's basically brain attraction in the south. College degrees, we're basically about par with the rest of the United States. The thing about Wisconsin is, and I'll make it very quick, we're not statistically different from most states. UW-Whitewater is a good example. About 70% of our graduates live in Wisconsin. They graduate from Whitewater, they love home cooking, they stay here. Our problem in Wisconsin is we don't attract people from other states. We don't get people to move to Wisconsin from California or from, Boston, whereas Minnesota does. If you go to college in Wisconsin, you're most likely to stay in Wisconsin. We'll get to it on that again. 60% of our college graduates, and our college graduate numbers are about the same as the rest of the country. You're born here. You go to California, 35% of their college graduates were born in California. People move to California. College graduate. Minnesota, 53%. Which means if we have the same number of college graduates in Minnesota, they're attracting them from outside. They have a magnet that brings, in my opinion, it's partially that we don't have a large metropolitan area to the extent that Minneapolis is. However, I will tell you this, and I mean this, my brother and sister live in Minneapolis, I wouldn't move there on a bet. It's cold, colder in this room. Wisconsin is unique in the country is that we're heavily reliant on manufacturing as opposed to the rest of the country. We manufacture three things. We manufacture food, we turn chickens into chicken nuggets and potatoes into potato chips. We manufacture heavy machinery. I grew up in the parking lot, if you've heard me before, I grew up in the parking lot of the Bizarre factory. My family's home was in, every morning I woke up to that noise. It was a great place. And we manufacture medical devices. If you saw Biz News yesterday, they talked about this. How it's one of the growth industries in Wisconsin is making medical devices. We're more heavily reliant on healthcare in Wisconsin, which is possibly a reflection of the aging population. What we do, 19% of our if you look up there, it's a little number, I realize we're all blind. 19% are in manufacturing. You go to California, it's 10%. You go to Virginia, it's 9%. You go to a place like Sheboygan County, it's over 25%. Manitowoc County. These are heavily reliant on manufacturing. I did this sideways so we can see it. Durable manufacturing, the blue line is what the national average is, the black line is Wisconsin. 12% of our workers are in durable manufacturing. It's about 7% for the country. Non-durable is the same. Healthcare, down at the bottom, we have a higher percentage in healthcare than the nation. Where do we fall short? Real estate, professional, and technical services. That's where we fall short. I don't worry about it because you can't live on the average. I mean, you have to be above average somewhere and below average somewhere else. So, how are we doing? On the left is our high water mark for employment. Back in third quarter of 2007, we had 2.846 million jobs. We basically, that number's wrong. We've finally hit that number. Taking us what? Is it 2015 already? It's taken us 7 years to get back to that number. We lost 23,000 jobs in construction and we lost 40,000 jobs in manufacturing. Where do we gain? Management of companies, which is management. I mean, in many cases it's holding companies and it's just upper management. And healthcare. This is what I did. I did this in November. I said we should be at baseline by Christmas. We should get those last 2,000 jobs back. Wisconsin always lags behind the country. We go up, we go down. But Wisconsin doesn't suffer the recessions the country suffers. We don't benefit with the expansions the country experiences. I have spent basically the last 8 years of my life studying the foreclosure crisis. We went into the foreclosure crisis. When I was younger, I foreclosed on homes, and I had a repo company. And so the UW Extension, in their wisdom, said, well, Russ knows how to foreclose on a home. He should track them. And so for 8 years, I've been tracking them. Wisconsin didn't have the same problems the rest of the country had. We had our problems, concentrated predominantly the north side of Milwaukee and some other parts of the state. But we did not suffer, but we didn't benefit. We didn't have the housing bubble to the extent the state did. Our recovery relative to the rest of the country, we're right there. We're in the middle. Minnesota's over there. Let's get compared to Minnesota. Yeah, it's kind of irritating. I like comparing us to Illinois. They're over there. We're going to get to Illinois in a second. Some things that have been going on. Automobile sales finally returned. This is the GM Janesville story. I mean, we were selling 20 million, 17 and a half, 18 million cars back in the 2000s. We went down to about 10 million cars. We had to get rid of capacity. This year we'll sell about 17 and a half million cars. We're replacing basically the fleet, because the fleet's gotten old. Now, the housing, this is where those 30,000, 23,000 housing jobs, construction jobs aren't coming back. In the first decade of the 21st century, in Wisconsin, we built 90,000 too many housing units. We just did. Imagine if you're Florida. I mean, we were the guys who weren't doing it, and we built 90,000 too many. You know, Florida, it's a train wreck. We added 300,000 people in that decade. We added 300,000 housing units. You average about 2.2 people per housing unit, so you can do the math and see, unless everyone's living by themselves, we built too many housing units. It'll take the rest of the decade to absorb those. It'll take until about 2020. We're not, and this is where we're at. This is Wisconsin's new construction, basically. We're trying to compensate down here for what happened up there. And so where we should be about there, we should be that line in the middle. We're trying, if you were doing math, it's a kind of that integrated area under the curve should be over there. And so we're sopping up that excess inventory. We're still building houses. There's always people who are going to buy, who want to build a new house. But there's a lot of theoretic inventory out there. Although the realtors I talk to, they say there is no inventory. I don't know how that works. Observation about the existing, this is where I think that the most fascinating thing that's going on in the economy is, Matt, what interest rate did you get on your mortgage?
4% maybe.
You overpaid. All the bankers are going, we want him. 4%, my God.
3.5 maybe.
3.5. He can't afford to sell his house 5 years from now, when rates are 6%, because he's gonna feel like a chump when he sells his house and he has to go into a 6 or 6.5% mortgage, which we know will be there. That's going to actually have a long-term impact on housing. It's going to have a positive impact on stability of neighborhoods, because people aren't going to be moving. He's going to be, and he lives in Wetwater, so we love that. He's not moving to Fort Atkinson. But the reality is, these low interest rates are going to limit future mobility, because people are going to be hard pressed to walk away from 3% mortgages. And they're gonna think about the fact that, you know, they're gonna move up to a house and they're gonna have to pay a lot more. It's gonna be costly to trade out of those low interest rates. Benefits neighborhood stability. This is back to our thing. Distressed sales are falling. The foreclosure crisis is over. I keep tracking it because you need to track things in the good times too. Oh yeah. See, I like Ross Perot. I like the short guy with big ears. I always, I have his haircut. You know, so it's great. I mean, where is Ross Perot? Because the trade deficit is, this is demand for oil. This is what's really interesting. This goes back to 1982. This is barrels. We really don't use as much oil. In fact, that's the ratio of energy used to real GDP. 1.8, we're down to 0.6. We produce a heck of a lot more stuff in the United States today than we did in 1981. We're just not using a lot of oil. As a result, the trade deficit, when I was in the grad school, was about $50 billion a month, $40 billion a month. Today it's about $40 billion a month. Our economy is about 2 times bigger. People don't talk about the trade deficit because the trade deficit was predominantly oil. And we're not importing as much and we're not using as much. International trade, let's get to Wisconsin. We'll have fun with Wisconsin. Wisconsin actually has a balanced trade with the world. Once again, Wisconsin's a weird state. We actually have a trade surplus with countries on the right. We sell them more than we buy. We sell more to Canada than we buy from Canada. We have a trade deficit with the countries on the left. We trade surplus with Canada, Great Britain, Australia. We have a trade deficit with China, Germany, Italy. Our exports are 23 billion. Our imports are 22 billion. What do we export? We export basically big, heavy machinery. We export, the top one is Bizarre Series, by the way. Parts attachments for derricks, mechanical shovels, medical hardware, capital goods, big metal. What do we import? Land's End. Clothing, bikes and scooters, medical hardware. We import some of the same stuff we export. But we import a lot of clothing. Yeah, see, this goes back to getting up at 4 in the morning. I was watching that game when the Packers were winning 45-0, and they put the quarterback back in. And I'm like, where's Matt Ryan? By the way, the Packers signed a Whitewater quarterback, so we're happy. They signed Blanchard. Growth in the near term, I believe these numbers. 50% reduction. How much more time do I have? I gotta end here sometime. Like about 3 minutes. Every day I watch CNBC. I love CNBC. And every day they bring out one person who says that falling oil prices is horrible for the economy because Caterpillar isn't selling this and Joy Global isn't selling that. And every day they bring on someone who talks about consumer spending. My opinion is there's 300 million Americans buying gasoline. And I know the guy's working at Caterpillar. 50% reduction in gas prices at the pump, reallocated to consumer spending, increases GDP growth by 35 basis points. It's a big deal. I was at Domino's one night, ordered a pizza. went to Domino's, 20 minutes, right? They were so backed up it took 40 minutes. I got mad, yelled at the manager. Came back the next week, ordered again because took 40 minutes again. Called the manager and I said, what is going on here? And he said, we're the busiest we've ever been in 20 years. He's an owner. And I'm like, and it's because of this. People were buying, I was buying gas, we all were buying gas. I have an SUV. It was costing me $70, $75 to fill it up. Now I can't crack 40. I'm an American, I spend the money. I mean, the bankers in the room, I should be buying CDs at 0.5%. But, I'm going to Domino's. Before I was buying Peppino's frozen pizzas. We're spending the money. And we're not spending it on gasoline, and the other half of it is, unemployment is falling. Is it real? I think it is. He's having trouble finding drivers. 7 years ago he was hiring college professors. Now the college professors got jobs. We hired Matt. Apologize for that. Wisconsin's GDP, my projections, it'll grow at 3.5% this year. I truly believe this. We had a bad first quarter. I coach football. I've had bad first quarters. I think the year will be reasonably good. Maybe not 3.5, maybe 3.4. But for once, if we grow at, you have to remember, our population grows every year. We need to grow 1.5% just to make up for the guys graduating from my college. 1.5%. If we don't grow 1.5%, we didn't grow. Because I threw all these people in the labor force. We have to grow 1% just to make up the fact that my students are smarter, faster, and better than me. They're more productive. So if we don't grow at 2.5%, we didn't grow. So we need to grow at 3.5% to really grow. And we're finally in a position, I think, where we're going to grow. We've grown slower than the rest of the country. We'll continue to do that because it's Wisconsin. But when we shrink, we don't shrink as much. And we stay below the rate of unemployment. And that's what it. The rest of this is more gibberish. Who do we blame? I don't really blame other people. We had economic problems. When I was in undergrad, we blamed Japan. Japan was taking over the world. They were buying Pebble Beach. In the 90s, we were blaming Mexico, Ross Perot, the big sucking sound. In 2000, we were blaming China. It's all China's fault. Now he's blaming evil bankers. The reality is the solution is to get to work and go to work and solve our own problems. Thank you.
The next speaker here is John Scallon from Baker Tilly. And just give us a second here, I'll get him set up. Please welcome.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks for inviting me and all of you taking the time this morning to attend. I was invited to talk a little bit about taxes and to compare Wisconsin's situation a little bit with Illinois. And I know many of you have roots in Illinois, so don't take this as Illinois bashing. I'm going to be as honest as I can about the features of both our tax systems. And if you have questions, by all means, save them to the end. Here's some of the topics I'm going to cover here. Starting out with why state and local taxes matter. Do they matter? You guys probably talk about it every day. We'll talk about some specifics between both states. And we'll look and see how these different taxes interact, because it's very, very hard to just look at a state and pick a rate and say, that state has a lower rate than ours, it's a better state. Not necessarily. And then we'll put it all together with some examples, some work that we've done in conjunction with Wceda and some other economic development agencies to do some tax comparisons, to really run the numbers. And that's what you have to do to get a handle on the impact of taxes. So what are the factors that influence business investment? And the economists in the group know this. Physical requirements if you're going to relocate a business. Why are you going there? Do you need extra land to build on? You probably need a railroad siding, maybe you need an interchange, something like that. So physical requirements rate very high. Obviously you're going to look at the rate of return on that investment. You're not going to invest unless it adds to the bottom line of your business. Labor force requirements, again, very, very important. Can you access a skilled, motivated, trained workforce to run your factories, if that's what you have, or to program your computers? Market proximity, that's a great one. I came across an article yesterday from the Chicago Cranes Business Journal, which said that a firm was going to add 300 jobs in Gary, Indiana. And the article, written obviously from a Chicago perspective, was like, why? Why would anyone put 300 jobs in Gary as opposed to here? Well, it was because their main customer was there. That's why. And I had to smile a little bit because the article also gave kind of a backhanded compliment to Wisconsin and Indiana because we're so competitive. We're pulling jobs out of Illinois. So the thought was, Gary, how do we lose this? Transportation. Does that favor? What are your costs? The logistics. Can you supply your markets? Can you get the raw materials you need? Access to capital. Obviously, you can't expand and invest unless you can get the cash. And again, that's perhaps where taxes come in and where economic development analysts can contribute. So down the list we have tax impacts, federal, state, and local, and the availability of incentives. Does that mean they don't matter? Not at all. It might not be the most important, but they are a factor. State and local taxes can account for up to 40% of total business tax costs, and that is a material number. All things being equal, capital is mobile. It's going to go to the place, to the site, where it gets the lowest rate of return, the highest rate of return, and all things being equal, perhaps taxes are lower. I mentioned, and you know it, state and local governments are actively competing for jobs and investment right now, everywhere across the country. I see it. One of my roles as the director of state and local tax for Baker Tilly is to talk to people in our DC office, to our New York office, to our Philadelphia office, who are asking what kind of incentives are available, and I have a business that wants to relocate, where should they go? So I'm kind of on the ramparts of this a little bit. Another thing too that can't be overlooked is businesses, in spite of the fact that they talk about tax cuts and they want incentives, they do like long-term stability in their tax and political climates. I think that's one of the things right now that probably is affecting Illinois. We've all probably seen articles about their, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, the $80 billion shortfall in their pension fund. How are they going to make that up? I thought I saw one statistic that said 1 in every $4 of their general fund tax revenues are going to be needed to close that gap. Just to give you an idea, another idea of the scale of that, it's estimated that 25 to $30 billion of sales taxes go uncollected because of internet sales. That's only a quarter. So if all the sales tax that's lost to the internet were to be dedicated to closing the Illinois pension deficit, it would take at least 4 years to get there. That's an annual number, $25 billion a year. So, that political climate is something that Illinois is going to have to deal with, and we know it's changing. So what are business objectives when they're looking at state and local taxes? Well, they want a tax strategy that fits what they're trying to do. If they need long-term stability and low rates, they're probably not going to locate in a jurisdiction that will give them big short-term incentives, but long-term continue to have high rates. Or if they need labor, they're going to look for jobs types incentives rather than capital. That seems kind of obvious. The other two things below that, maximize cash flow and having a payback period that's short on capital investments. Again, that's an investment type of strategy, rate of return consideration, but nevertheless, what you're really looking at is your after-tax rate of return. So those things factor in. If you're dealing with a public company, one of the things they focus on is the lowest effective tax rate, including state and local taxes. Okay? So a lot of times you think cash flow is most important when you're talking about taxes. If you're dealing with a public company, they're looking at their book tax rate, which is different than the cash tax rate. So you have to talk to them a little bit differently about that. Income taxes will matter a great deal to them. It can't be overstated. I think that if your state doesn't have a balanced, reasonable tax system that's relatively easy to comply with, where's that? It's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? Taxes and easy compliance. But I can tell you states that have horrible tax systems. New York, big surprise. California, big surprise. Massachusetts, big surprise. They're terrible. I see their forms. I know how much effort it takes to complete those returns. You don't want to be there if you can avoid it from a tax standpoint. And the other thing is, again, this idea of long-term stability. Businesses want to manage their tax risks. At least most of them do. So they're aware of making promises about jobs and capital investment, and they're going to look at whether or not there are clawbacks and things like that in their incentive agreements. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be. There probably should be. But it's something they're going to consider in a location analysis. I find this kind of interesting. We talk about how businesses perceive the tax situation. According to a 2014 EY survey, 85% of U.S. companies are experiencing more risk and uncertainty relative to tax legislation and regulation 2 years ago. So the economy is getting better, and in Wisconsin, but you still have a lot of skittishness among executives. So the more states can do to have long-term stability in their tax climates, I think the more attractive they're going to be. So let's get into Illinois and Wisconsin specifically. And when you think about it, I'm going to go into some specifics here. Some factors I think that you need to be aware of are, the number and nature of taxes imposed by state and local governments really affect the total state and local tax burden that a business pays. Again, you can't look at just sales tax, property tax. They all work together, and we'll see that at the end. It's become tremendously important when thinking about businesses to consider the type of entity it is. Because if you're a statutory or a C Corp as it's called, that corporation pays the taxes initially. But more and more businesses have gone to what we call pass-throughs or flow-throughs, where taxes are not paid necessarily by a partnership, an LLC, a subchapter S corporation. And that will radically impact the tax equation, because really, now the taxes fall directly to the owner of that business, to the individual that owns that business, to the trust, to the family. Industry type. Wisconsin is all in on manufacturing right now. And we'll see why, but we've got the manufacturing and ag credit. If you look at our sales tax, all the exemptions for manufacturing. If you look at the property tax, we've got M&E exempt, inventories exempt. New York is another state that's gone all in, just about eliminating taxes in general for manufacturing. If you go out to DC, real estate's the big play out there. Profitability. Okay, if you're dealing with a profitable company, then income taxes probably matter. But if you're in a different part of the life cycle, you're dealing with a startup, at the front end, the income tax rate isn't going to matter because they're generating net operating losses. But at the back end, when they sell, are capital gains exempt. They're looking 10 years down the road or 5 years. When I cash out of here, how are you going to tax me then? So those are considerations. And again, the availability of tax credits, exemptions, incentives. What are some advantages that Wisconsin has? And this will seem a little bit like tax mumbo jumbo. So I'll try to hit some of them and explain it. Wisconsin doesn't tax pass-through entities like partnerships. Some states do. Illinois does, California does, Kentucky does, Texas does. Wisconsin does not. If you have a multi-state business, they have to use a formula to figure out how much of their profits should be allocated and taxed in a state. Wisconsin looks at one thing. What's the ratio of your sales in Wisconsin to your sales everywhere? More and more and more states have adopted this, including almost all of our neighbors. Why? It used to be research expense credit. That's great. A lot of states have that. Other credits, we want to stimulate venture capital investments. We've got the angel investor credit. What about some other things? Individuals have a net operating loss carried back so they can get taxes back from some prior years. Different kinds of capital gain deductions. Again, if you're selling your business, great. If you're investing, great. Credit for taxes paid to other states. Generally, if you're an individual and you pay taxes on business income to another state, Wisconsin gives you a credit for that. Most states do that. What makes Wisconsin unique, though, is if another state taxes the business entity itself. For example, Illinois will tax your subchapter S corporation or your LLC, as will California. Wisconsin will give you a credit for the business level taxes on your personal income tax return. Most states don't do that. So again, kind of advantage of Wisconsin. Let's stack up Wisconsin and Illinois and take a look. Illinois has gotten more competitive. 2 years ago, their top rate at the corporate level was 9.5. They've eased that down under their new governor now, and I'm glad Russ pointed out a mistake in his presentation, so now I'm not afraid to do it in mine. For those of you who can add 2.5 and 5.25 does not equal 7.25. The rate should be 7.75. So Illinois' corporate rate is slightly below Wisconsin's now. But that may not matter if you're a manufacturer. We both have the same kind of apportionment factor that I talked about. Again, sort of no advantage there. Sales factor sourcing relates to how we cite sales of services, not just goods. We have the same sort of look towards where your customers are, so no advantage there. Throwback, both Wisconsin and Illinois have throwback sales. However, we exclude foreign sales. Throw-out sales is a different form of throwback, and I won't go into this very far, but it's a disadvantage to a business that either licenses software or sells services. Wisconsin has no such rule. Illinois does, meaning it pulls more income into its orbit than Wisconsin will. We both deal with affiliated companies in the same way. Combined reporting is like consolidated reporting. We both have benefits for research expenses and credits. We have the jobs creation deduction. Illinois does not. DPAD is an acronym for domestic production activity deduction. It's a large deduction for producing things that's allowed for federal income tax purposes. Illinois allows the deduction. Wisconsin has gone to the manufacturing credit. And again, this is kind of a sea change. What it is a direct credit against the taxes your business would pay. And in 2015, it's 5.526%. And in 2016, it's going to be 7.5%. Well, okay, if you look at Wisconsin's rate, at the corporate level, it's 7.9. If you get a credit for 7.5%, you can do the math. Your effective tax rate on manufacturing income or ag income is 0.4%. 0.4%. That's a pretty big advantage. The individual income tax. Again, they're a little bit different. Illinois taxes the broader measure, what's called your adjusted gross income. Wisconsin taxes that, but then gives you an itemized credit for it. Generally, I think, at least in my opinion, you're probably going to come out a little the worse for the wear in Wisconsin, but it may be almost a push. We do not tax pass-through entities. Illinois has a separate 1.5% tax on partnerships, LLCs, S corps. Wisconsin gives you a credit for that if you pay it. We have long-term capital gains deductions. We have a credit for property taxes paid up to $200. Not so good, we do have a minimum tax. Many of us are stuck in that for federal and state purposes. Just take your income and multiply it by 20% and hand it over. That's about how it works. Again, not too bad. I think that, you know, the long-term capital gain is probably the biggest advantage we have here. What about sales and use tax? This is kind of an underrated tax. Wisconsin, our state rate's 5, Illinois is 6.25. Local rates, probably the max you're going to pay is another 0.6% if you live in Milwaukee and pay the stadium tax and the county tax. In Illinois, it runs up to at least 3 3/4, and in Cook County, it's probably, in Chicago itself, it's probably higher. Our exemptions are very similar for manufacturing. However, Illinois does not allow an exemption for what I would say are manufacturing consumables. So little saw blades you use, or oil, or lubricants, you know, things that get consumed but aren't part of the product. They do have a credit that's available, but it's not particularly easy to use. We exempt manufacturing, fuel, and electricity. Illinois exempts it from sales tax, but still taxes it under a separate utilities excise tax. So again, an advantage to us there. Very similar down the line, I think, for these other items. One thing that Wisconsin, I'll give it credit for, I was kind of surprised when it did, it exempts cloud computing services. And that sounds like, you know, everybody talks about the cloud, but what does it mean? The amount of software and services that's migrating is tremendous, and it's accelerating. And for Wisconsin to say, we're not going to tax this, it's going to face the loss of a major amount of revenue as more and more software, which software is taxable, migrates into the cloud. So I was surprised when they came out with that position. As long as the economy holds, and we have an interest in a technologically based economy in Wisconsin, I would expect that would be an advantage. Property taxes, this isn't anyone's favorite subject here. The WDOR assesses manufacturing property, excuse me, which I think at least creates some uniformity. Generally, we assess based on market. Major business exemptions from the personal property tax, those are all good. What's happened to our personal property tax is really it hits now mostly on non-manufacturing businesses. Retailers, grocery stores, things, people with fixtures. It's a very uneven tax, and you're hearing now up in Madison some strong support for eliminating the personal property tax. That's not a panacea because that'll mean the real estate burden will shift a little bit, perhaps some to residential, but at least in the comparisons we do, it's probably the biggest disadvantage Wisconsin has. Illinois only taxes real property, assessments done at the local level. Their system's a little different. Typically, they're only assessing at 1/3, or they're taxing at 1/3 of their assessed value. So you'll see very, very high nominal rates. When you take account of that, really, very often the real estate rates will look to be about the same. No personal property tax. It was funded by these entity level and corporate level personal property replacement taxes. They're really income taxes. So let's put all these pieces together here, and I'll try to wrap it up. Again, you have to look at all the different pieces and see how they fit. You have to account for the interactions between the different taxes. And typically when we do these things, at least at the front end, we don't factor in incentives. We try to get people to look at their tax environment before they get incentives. Because long term, the incentives are going to go away, and you're still going to have your plant or your computer software business in this state. Here's a comparison that we did, and it's a C corporation, meaning the corporation itself is subject to tax. And we did it over a multi-year period because what we were trying to do is illustrate the impact of Wisconsin's manufacturing credit as it phased in. The first year was 1.875, and by the end of this comparison in 17, it's up to the full 7.5%. So there's some interesting things here. If you look at the total situation, Wisconsin taxes are only about 68% over this 4-year period. And again, it's an entity level tax. We come out very, very well on income taxes. If you look on the top line, which is income tax, by the last year when the credit is fully phased in, the Wisconsin income tax burden is $2,500 versus almost $60,000 in Illinois. Sales and use tax, Wisconsin's rates being lower for this particular location, again, fairly significant advantage to Wisconsin. Personal property tax, again, disadvantage. It's about a $40,000 over that 4-year period negative for a business looking at this. Real estate taxes favor Wisconsin. In this case, just because the particular jurisdictions we looked at, there were much higher rates. And then state unemployment taxes, Wisconsin's rates are not particularly low. One thing to keep in mind about these comparisons is we're talking to a business that's going to move. So if they move into Wisconsin, they may be trading a lower experienced rate for a new employer rate. And new employer rates are typically higher. So very often in these years, if we're stuck with a new employer rate, we're not going to look that good. But after the 3rd year, that starts to cycle to meet the actual experience. So these things, again, they can be a little bit deceptive. There's a lot of assumptions here. We don't pretend that this is actual taxes, but with the information we have, this is what it will look like. This is a comparison we did for a pass-through business. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's a partnership. And so when you look at the taxes there, those taxes are, for the most part, at least in Wisconsin, all paid by the individual owner. In Illinois, part of that tax burden is actually falling on the business itself, but of course, if you own the business, you're paying the taxes at the end of the day. Huge difference here, but it's based largely on the assumption that the new owner will move to Wisconsin. And if he stays in Illinois, what happens is Illinois has a credit for taxes paid. So all that really happens is that the Wisconsin taxes go down while he stays in Illinois. Well, then his Illinois tax goes up. So this is about what happens. So we make some key assumptions, but of course, from Wisconsin's standpoint, what you can say is you should move to Wisconsin because then this difference will matter. If you stay in Illinois and just move your business here, you get no tax advantage. And I was talking to a gentleman in our audience tonight who faced this exact situation. He didn't tell me he was buying a house up here, but that could happen. Sales and use tax, again, advantage to Wisconsin because of the rate. Personal property tax, a little bit of a disadvantage. Real estate, slightly to Wisconsin. UC was about the same. And we've done, I looked at 9 or 10 of these before I came down, and what I typically saw is about a 50 to 70% ratio of Wisconsin taxes to Illinois. So consistently lower, but what I expect is it's probably going to tail down a little bit. And that's also biased by every single one of these was for a manufacturing business. If we were looking at a non-manufacturing business, like an engineering firm, a software where the Wisconsin income tax credit for manufacturing didn't come into play, the numbers might not look quite as good. But again, if you're talking about manufacturing, Wisconsin competes very, very well. So with that, I'll wrap up here. But we talked about taxes. And I've argued that they do matter, but keep in mind when you're talking to businesses, particularly larger businesses, sometimes there's a difference in perception between the message they communicate about taxes and how they actually actually will react to a tax situation. So this was a survey done by Vertex and CFO Research of some CFOs about how they reacted to taxes. And the barred green lines, I think, have some interesting information. And they were asked, how often are taxes regularly considered when you make decisions about the company versus how often should they be considered? And there's an interesting gap between them. So if you look, for example, at the line that says committing to a major transaction, so say that's expanding a business, 70% of the CFOs said taxes should matter, but they said only 44% of the time were they actually taken account of. And spending my whole career in tax, and I started with the Department of Revenue in 1978. And by the way, I was an economist, not a CPA then. So I feel privileged to be in the room with other economists. What they say, if you take all the economists in the world, put them end to end, they never reach a conclusion. And I'm in that group, but I'll try to give you a conclusion here. So let's take another one. Expanding marketing activities to new customers. 43% said, yeah, taxes should matter. We should look at taxes here, sales taxes, or things like that. But only 19% of the time did the business really react that way. Making major M&A decisions, merger and acquisitions, 49% of the time taxes weren't considered. And I've seen that where taxes are brought in at the back end of the process. We're going to execute this transaction. Oh, get the tax guys in here. Yeah, you know. Oh, by the way, this is going to cost a whole lot of money. Why didn't you tell us? So why am I telling you this? Because I'm trying to introduce the thought that there's a realistic view of how taxes are. They are important, but businesses don't always lead with taxes. So consider that. What are the other advantages when you're recruiting businesses from Illinois or elsewhere? Labor force, facilities, access to good schools, low-cost capital. Those all matter, and they matter very much. Probably more than taxes, but taxes do matter on the margin. So I just wanted to kind of leave that thought with you. You have to put all the pieces together here when you're out there making your pitch. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Derek, and thank you very much.
Speakers, I did want to open it up to questions for a few minutes. Maybe Jeff, she'll bring a microphone there too.
I've got a quick question for John and a second one for Russ. You and I are probably about the same age. I might have it by a year or two, but do you think in our lifetimes there'll be any remedy for relief of the corporate federal rate to encourage the overseas, protection of sheltering taxes and whatnot? I mean, there's a lot of talk about it almost every day.
Yes.
But is it ever going to happen, or are we'd be dead and buried before it ever gets off the treadmill?
In my mind, this is just me, I believe it's almost inevitable. I mean, they really have an untenable situation now where there's an incentive to push more and more profits overseas and not to repatriate it. And I think eventually there's going to be a realization, and if the political climate's right, to change the corporate tax and repatriate some of those profits and frankly stop what is very unproductive, generally tax sheltering behavior. And there's a term for it now. It's called base erosion and profit shifting. And it's the conversation piece all over the world. In Europe, in Canada, in the United States, how do they stop this? Well, you can enact a lot of different laws that people like me will figure out how to get around, but unless you come up with a balanced tax system and lower the rates, that behavior will continue. And so I believe it will someday. The political climate's going to drive when that happens.
Thank you. Second, quick one for Russ.
Sure.
I was a little bit surprised on the $22 million import and export for Wisconsin. I would have thought both of those numbers would have been radically bigger. Was it 22 million or 22
No, that was
billion?
billion.
Billion.
Yeah, that was 22.
Oh, okay, very
Yeah.
good. Yeah, that makes sense.
22,000 million.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
That was the easy question.
I have a question for David. In the budget, on page 20, it shows a $60,000 increase for the Warwick County Agriculture Society for the fair. What's going on over at the fair?
That's a good question. We had typically, first of all, the fair is its own organization, the Agricultural Society, which has been, I think, served the county well because other counties are appropriating a lot of money for the fair, and it's been a real positive thing and a big draw and pretty much self-sustaining. Although in recent years we've had an appropriation, I think $10,000, eventually up to $20,000 a year to help them. This year we really got to the point, and that Fair Board did too, of looking at the future of that, and that money is actually to fund a strategic plan, and so they're just starting that right now. The county's part in that was to put together the request for proposals and to pay for it. I think it'll pay for the entire study, and they're going to be interviewing stakeholders and looking at what, if any, changes have to be made to the fair to keep it sustainable and profitable and a positive thing for the community. So, great question.
This is a question I think for probably all three. One of the slides that Dave had showed that about 25% of the residents of the county are low income. Do you see trends, and what are the big issues?
I should probably start last so I can benefit from their answers. It's an issue. I mean, clearly, and Walworth County it's got such diversity. You've got extreme wealth and high property values and poverty. And one of I think it was in the journal this morning or maybe last night that I read about, notwithstanding the fact that there's more jobs, the poverty rate is gotten higher. We've got a large portion of the school kids that are on subsidized lunches now, and so it's an issue. I mean, that drives a lot of our programs. It costs Health and Human Services and others. So it doesn't answer the question other than to acknowledge that it's an issue and impacts us. I think we've gotten a little bit of a break because the economy has been recovering, but that's cyclical too. So definitely a factor for us.
From a tax standpoint, I guess that scenario affects a lot of different things. People with less money to spend, retail sales tax collections lower, income tax collections lower. Part of that I think is structural, and I'll leave this to the economists in the sense that the replacement jobs in the economy have not been the high-paid manufacturing technology jobs that were there prior to 2008. And many of us who have children know that when you see our kids coming into the labor force and they're underemployed. So I think probably the kinds of things that we can come up with in rooms like this and meetings like this and in the State House to increase job generation and quality jobs and education is the only thing that's really going to offset that, because I think the structural trend has been bad. It's been the other way. I'll turn it over to somebody who probably really knows what they're talking about.
Well, I gotta say this, that I was up giving a speech up north, and one of the people in the audience accused me of being a liberal college professor who wanted to give everything away. And if you actually knew me, that was kind of an amusing comment. But I think that we have to, as a society, recognize that we have a responsibility to reach down to lift up. And I don't know how we do it, but we have to remind ourselves every day of this fact, that we do have a growing underclass, and I worked in a factory where about half of our employees were assemblers, and I worked there for quite a while, and when it came time to close the factory, every single person who was a machinist or a welder got another job, and the assemblers didn't. And so on the bottom end, they have a responsibility to reach out. And so what we have to do is we have to just encourage people to work hard and move forward.
Any other questions? I'm sure they might be willing to talk if you want to privately, but.
Over by the fireplace, so.
Over by the fireplace. But just real quickly, I just want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our speakers for taking time. Acknowledge our event sponsors again, Lake Lawn Resort and Ideal Impressions. One quick plug for membership. Anyone who's not a member would love to have you join. Can help give us better reach and enable us to do more economic development work. I'd love to talk to you about that if you haven't. But again, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a nice day.